So in the latest chapter, there's a book like Dio's Diary from Part 6 about puzzles of the universe and instructions to acquire power. The new continuity makes a lot of references to old ideas in ways that seem like old concepts on the surface, but go in opposite directions to subvert them. But in this case, for a couple reasons, this looks like a real new way to achieve heaven, that same ultimate level of power, and it looks like Jodio will be the one to do it. So the questions are, how would this new type of heaven plan work with JoJo's power system, given that this is a world where something similar has already been achieved? And how is Jodio going to follow this heaven plan in the story? When the new continuity references old ideas, most of the time they do something similar, but work in different ways. The Devil's Palm is a misdirect that at first looks like it's granting stands because it's also a crater of a meteorite, when it's really the land responding to something that's moving across it. And Kira is a hero who just ends up with a similar home interior and mystery around him. In the Jojolands, this diary has references to powerful numbers and religion and waiting for the new moon as a callback to the heaven plan from Stone Ocean. But it's Latrato's diary, full of instructions that his family used to remain in power, whether that was his intention for it or not. What makes the Howler's antagonists who contrast Jodio is how, where Jodio tries to understand what's above him and conquer everything to rise higher, the Howlers are okay letting higher forces stay above them, because they can already live peacefully at the top of humanity. The Howlers' attitude has been that as long as they're loved by nature and don't find themselves falling, they don't have to look further into things. And that's the source of their faith, their trust in the mysticism of the universe. Because the moment things fall short, they look to their book and try questioning the origins and strings of nature. They try to acquire that knowledge, like Howler is doing right now. Despite the religious imagery they use, the Howlers only put faith in higher powers and consider the world beyond them absurd because the world is kind to them. So when they carve a cross out of fulgurite or refer to the processes of nature as divine, they're just twisting religious symbols, signs of the unknown, to validate however they want to see the world. Which suggests that even though the supernatural is involved and the Jojolands could cross into mythological territory, the point of this diary is that the stuff it draws power from is more nature-based to contrast the religious way it's presented. Now that we're 28 chapters in, the Jojolands seems to be about overcoming what causes or tempts people to disconnect from others. In Part 7, it was about how to stand on your own, against hardship and the challenges of life. So Johnny was given an extra hurdle, physical paralysis, to work through, so he'd eventually be strong enough to overcome anything and resist the traps people fall for. And the villain was used to show the wrong way to stand up to challenges, because Valentine's power came from sacrifice. And in Part 8, Josuke made a home for himself by accepting his amnesia and embracing who he actively chose to live with, while Toru tried to make a home for himself by turning people into permanent and stable memories. Now, in the Jojolands, Jodio has ASPD and repeatedly encounters things that would tempt people to separate from groups or keep opportunities to themselves. Because building on Part 5, this story seems to be about resisting the kinds of circumstances that divide people or would turn them into King Crimsons. Like with Diavolo in Golden Wind, King meaning a position above people, and Crimson meaning they're embarrassed or blushing at the thought of being equal and vulnerable. That's why there seem to be multiple King Crimsons in Part 9, with the Mate Kudasai and the Howlers so far. It's about the traps that cause people to become them. So similar to characters like Miss Robinson and Sandman, who fell for bad ways to stand on their own, the King Crimsons seem to be people who have let obstacles in their pasts divide them from others. With Usagi, who can now only approach social interactions with an agenda, and Howler, who, whatever his stand may be, is effectively Shrek at the start of that movie. Antisocial and protective of his comfortable property, and ignorant of how other people are in danger, because he hasn't been very well informed, and all he's seen growing up is that other people are wrongfully hostile toward him because of what he was born as. So he's grumpy and holds on to what luxuries he can get, while he shuts people out and doesn't realize his complacency lets some villains sabotage everyone else to prevent them from having similar luxuries of their own. This book he's using now is a device for people to reference, so they can put their own spin on the world. The cryptic puzzles and religious riddles are ways to identify hidden patterns in nature, really obscure mechanisms in plain sight. Because if you learn to see them, and what actions would interact with them, you can climb the ladder of cause and effect by being able to cause specific flows of activity using the pieces of the world around you. If you climb the ladder high enough, you should reach a level of control over the world that's similar to the old heaven plan. But the way you would learn to spot mechanisms would isolate you from others. Because you need a lens to be able to rationalize hidden and subtle patterns through, to guess how to interact with them. So the cryptic phrasing and advice in Latrato's diary does paint half of the picture. But what matters is your individual interpretation, to connect these instructions to how you perceive and interact with everything. So while it seems like it enlightens people, this book is going to be something that reinforces each reader's mindset and slowly separates their worldview from others, because it will validate however they personally interpret causality, while also giving them new ways to interact with the world so they're no longer experiencing the world around them in the same way as other people. It's another way to tempt people to disconnect from others, but unlike the lava rock, it offers the way to an endless amount of power. So it's much more tempting, it might offer multiple power-ups, and it could be what's used by Jodio to achieve heaven. Because that's the level of power he will need to beat what's going to be the main threat of this part. Another trend in JoJo's is that whatever the main JoJo uses to win becomes what the villain uses in the next part. It's a bit of a stretch for parts 1 through 3, but in part 4, Josuke uses the power of society to overwhelm Kira. So then in part 5, Diavolo takes over society to make his empire invincible, which Giorno can only beat with the heavy arrow and the potential he inherited from Dio. So then in part 6, Pucci's stand comes from the heavy arrow, while he inherits the heaven plan from Dio, and it takes the Joestars passing on the torch to Emporio to beat him. In part 7, Valentine's stand comes from passing the torch. But the new continuity adds another trend, where the main JoJos overcome their shortcomings with the spin. So each JoJo awakens a power based on a way that rotation theoretically adds freedom. That's why in part 7, when Valentine's singularity power makes an event horizon where things could enter from other worlds and be mutually destroyed as they're pulled into each other, Johnny could use the connectedness of the wider world to channel the infinite spin and apply rotation to Valentine. Because it's like adding rotation to a black hole, so it propels you around it instead of destroying you, like those Penrose diagrams. But then in part 8, Toru uses the connectedness of the wider world to trap everyone in Final Destination. Since chain reactions are emergent, they rely on multiple pieces, so they depend on deeper mechanics that allow them to exist, and their entropy increases, so to continue or to mean anything, they have to be a foundation new things can emerge from. Josuke beats him with potential. He uses the spin to tap into the invisible rotational freedom spinners have to make this supersymmetric counterpart to his bubbles from outside the field of chain reactions Toru relies on. Which means the main villain of part 9 is going to use fundamental theoretical facts the world operates under, like the increase of entropy, which will theoretically eventually lead to the universe running out of heat. And if their power does take after Josuke's with potential, it could be based on superpositions. Because if someone never truly opens up to other people, as long as their heart is unobserved, they don't have to commit to any relationship or explanation about themselves. And their ambiguity gives them the freedom to be and pursue everything they want at once. And just like how only socializing with others through agendas or pack mentalities would come from division and not let you truly connect with people, quantum entanglement fundamentally comes from dividing the universe and increases entropy. But the main reason I think this would be Jodio's main villain is because November Rain is a song about finding a way to somehow survive inevitable destruction caused by fundamental principles of the universe if you can connect with others. Even if the stand can be used to climb higher and away from the rest of humanity, it can also be used to rein whoever it gets above back down. We know this is a story where a character who takes after the Joestars, and also Dio, is going to grow as a person. and it's a story where he'll eventually learn to connect with people and overcome the temptations to isolate from others. So while he wants to acquire more power and would follow a heaven plan like Dio, while Dio would try to climb above heaven to have ultimate influence over the world, Jodio would climb to the highest point and bring the power of heaven, as well as anyone climbing with him, down to earth. Because this is the story of one boy becoming filthy rich, in the sense that connecting with everything and everyone will give him access to everything around him. He can be the source of flow, the source of energy and opportunity everything in existence needs to survive inevitable destruction. Because he can eventually counteract entropy, how everything tends to spread out and disperse energy, by learning to connect and pull everything back together, which would make him the 9th star on the cover of the diary, in the middle of all of them but sharing the same night sky. Thematically, this being the point of the story would fall in line with the Fountain Boy. And in the Fountain Boy mural, we see November Rain being the source of energy and opportunity for all other stands, as it rejuvenates the world and provides it with flow by pouring potential downward with its rainfall, where stands are ordered in a pyramid based on strength or influence, with different colored backgrounds behind them based on the distance those light waves can travel. Red can travel the farthest, so it's the top background for November Rain. And this version of November Rain has reached a point where it's a nozzle for concentrating the forces of the universe, like if Jodio achieves his version of heaven. Because its background contains the sky, the heavens, it's harnessing the wider world, whereas every other stand just has a blank background. Because in general, the point of a stand is that no matter what wider flow they're trapped in, or how strong other stands may be, no matter how small the range, some activity in the universe bends around this specific point, so stands can still distinguish themselves against a wider universe, or other stand users. But because November Rain is able to position itself at the source of power, every other stand depends on the flow it creates. Immediately beneath it in the pyramid are the green background stands, the really overpowered ones like Star Platinum and Killer Queen. Then beneath them in the pyramid are the blue background stands, the smallest wavelength, but because they're still on the outside of the pyramid and have direct exposure to November Rain's flow, even though they're not as strong as stands like Star Platinum or Killer Queen, they have ways to grow stronger. Here we have Valentine's D4C, which makes a strong ability by connecting his versions across all universes, and Tusk, which uses the wider world to support its power. But then lastly, we have the weaker stands inside the pyramid where there's no light. The ones who are cut off from November Rain's flow, so they're smaller and their silhouettes are black. Stone Free comes from a rigged situation, and even though Gold Experience Requiem is powerful, Gold Experience had no way of defeating Diavolo's invincible empire without outside help. These stands have no means to have influence over their circumstances on their own. I'm not saying that the Fountain Boy has to be a clue to the meaning of the Jojolands, but the themes do have some overlap. And even though one of them is very hidden, there are 9 stars around the moon in November Rain's sky. So it felt like there could have been an intentional connection there when we eventually saw the cover of Latrato's diary in this chapter.